In this fourth chapter, Rachel Held Evans emphasizes the power of imagination and the crucial role that stories play in biblical interpretation. This chapter focuses on what are called wisdom stories, and it sent me to thinking that we don't use that word wisdom very much in our everyday vernacular. We can probably all call to mind certain quotes like, "Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Yet in this chapter, we discover that wisdom comes alive through stories, parables, and metaphors. The biblical scholar Judy Fentress Williams has coined the term sanctified imagination, and it underscores this invitation to be creative and sometimes even playful with many of the stories that we encounter in Scripture. Evans uses the example of Jesus' parables, which frequently employ everyday scenarios and characters familiar to the audience then, to illustrate how these ordinary stories can relay divine truths. For instance, parables can transcend basic moral storytelling and invite listeners into a reflective experience where deeper spiritual and ethical lessons emerge organically. Recently, I was participating in a session with our lay preachers, and one of those lessons did emerge organically. Our instructor gave a sermon on the feeding of the 5,000. Now, we've all heard that story so many times, and we're tempted to reduce it into a formula or a quick synopsis. And yet the preacher opened up the story in a way I had never encountered it before, through the eyes of the young boy and his loaves and fishes. The preacher described in detail how the young boy probably had to go and ask his mother to go to this gathering. He described the mother's probable concern about this new prophet on the scene and the potential danger of her son around these large crowds. The boy's enthusiasm eventually wins his mom over, and she lovingly packs him a lunch of loaves and fish. Up until that sermon, I confess, I had always seen the young boy as just sort of a functionary figure in the story. I never imagined how exciting and challenging and profound it must have been for him to be called up front near Jesus, and how he became a dynamic catalyst simply by sharing that sweet lunch packed by his mother. We're invited to stand alongside and watch how what seemed such a small, insignificant thing becomes so much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Evans encourages us and gives us that permission to embrace these imaginative aspects of reading the Bible by suggesting that we approach Scripture with a sense of wonder and creativity that can unlock new dimensions of wisdom. The nuance of this sense of wisdom can lead us to a retelling of biblical narratives in fresh and contemporary ways. Evans does this in her telling of the story of Job. As she tells us, so what does the story of Job say about wisdom? Well, for one thing, it favors the wisdom of those who have actually suffered over those who merely speculate about it. The one who complains to God, pleads with God, rails at God, does not let God off the hook for a moment. That person is at last admitted into mystery. They pass through a door that only pain will open, and they are thus qualified to speak of God in a way that others cannot speak. By envisioning ourselves as part of the story, we can explore our own spiritual paths, confront our questions and doubts, and find solace and inspiration in the shared human experience. This is the path of wisdom. It's not immediate like social media, our social media fix when we scroll, or the movies that we stream over and over on varying platforms. This is a journey that we intentionally take by opening ourselves to new insights and challenges, certainly a fitting posture for this season of Lent. We all have wisdom stories to share. A lot of them are born out of suffering or struggle. But it's innate in us to want to share that with what we have learned or experienced and invite others into the canvas of our life. We also discovered that God can handle our seasons of praise, lament, anger, and frustration. As Evan says, when we stop trying to force the Bible to be something that it's not, static, certain, obsolete, absolute, then we are free to revel in what it is, living, breathing, confounding, and wise. In many ways, we surrender to the wisdom that we know is in the text, even though we may not know actually how it works or how to capture it. My hope is that you will discover new wisdom in this study and in the stories you share with each other.